Hey guys, welcome to Ask Truth Apologetics. We're here to discuss today a little bit more of Ahmed Deedat's combat kit against Bible thumpers. In my previous video, I went over the verses that he cited to show that Arabs were in Arabia. And I'm going to talk about why I think that's very interesting that he was using the Bible as a platform to show that Muhammad is prophesied and predicted within the Bible. And what that means is that he believes that at least some part of the Bible is properly preserved. But in these next videos, we're going to go into where he starts attacking the Bible and its preservation. So I feel like he's acting hypocritically a little bit, right? So he was saying where the Arabs are in Arabia and how they, how the Bible talks about them and says that a prophet's going to come from them and how the prophet's going to have responsibility, how Muhammad is apparently Yahweh from the Bible, and how the Bible was predicting the conquest of Mecca, and yet here he is going to attack the Bible. So let's just go ahead and get into the presentation. All right, so now that we're into the presentation, this is the combat kit refuting Bible thumpers. So there are several more passages than just this in the Quran that you see here on your screen about how it does affirm the Bible, but I think these will be sufficient enough for us to continue to move forward. So in chapter 5, verse 44, it mentions that the Torah is a guidance and a light. In 546, it mentions that the Gospels are a guidance and a light. And then in 3:3, the Quran says it is a confirmation of the Torah and the Gospel. And in 1643, it mentions that if Muhammad himself is in doubt about his own revelations, he should consult people who know the Bible, and they will affirm him and his message. So I just find this to be very, very interesting, keeping in light of what we went over last week or last time in my last video, and what we're going to go into moving forward into future videos, including this one. So he finds some absurd things that go on in the Bible. And the first thing that he mentions is that Abraham marries his sister, right? So he cites Genesis 12:19 and Genesis 12:20. So I'm going to go ahead and read this in context. We're going to read Genesis 12:17 through 20, and then Genesis 20:11 through 12. Okay, so this is 12:17 to 20. So, but the Lord, or Yahweh, afflicted Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarah, Abraham's wife. So Pharaoh called Abraham and said, "What is this you have done to me? Why did you not tell me that she was your wife? Why did you say that she is my sister? So I took her for my wife. Now then, here is your wife. Take her and go." And Pharaoh gave men orders concerning him, and they sent him away with his wife and all that he had. So here we are in Genesis 20:11 through 12, where it says, Abraham said, "I did it," right, in terms of I presented her as my sister to you and not as my wife. He says, "I did it because I thought there is no fear of God in all this place, and they will kill me because of my wife. Besides, she is indeed my sister, the daughter of my father, though not the daughter of my mother, and she became my wife." Right? So for a lot of us reading this, we may be reading this for the first time and realizing this for the first time that Abraham did actually marry his half sister, Sarah, right? This is really uncomfortable for anyone to think about. And we have to ask ourselves the question, why would the Bible include this type of information if it thinks that Abraham is a hero of the faith, right? So this is what actual textual critics and historians do, right? They parse through ancient narratives and they use a criteria known as the criteria of embarrassment to determine the truthfulness or fictionalness that's even a word, of a certain book, right? So there is no lying motive for someone to make up a legendary account of a man who is the founder of their religion that says he married his half sister. That would be embarrassing, right? So the people who wrote the Bible love Abraham. He is the founder of their faith. He is the founder of monotheism in their eyes, so there would be no reason for them to just make up something that's embarrassing about him. So the fact that it's included in the Bible, an embarrassing fact about him that's included in the Bible, would lead historians and textual critics to believe that the Bible is an accurate representation of what historically and actually happened, right? So if they're willing to include these embarrassing facts about these people, then that would lead us to believe that they are more likely to include other facts in the text, right? So is this an absurd fact? Or the answer obviously is yes. It's very absurd that someone would marry their sister. But does this fact make the Bible a false book? No, not at all, right? Quite the contrary. It actually strengthens the historicity and accuracy of the Bible authors. We're going to go switch gears here a little bit and get a little theological here. And we're going to ask ourselves, why does God use people such as Abraham? Why does he use him to found a faith when he has such a major flaw in one of the things that he chose to do, like choosing to marry his sister? So let's see what Jesus has to say about this in Mark chapter 2, verses 16 to 17. So to put it into context, and the scribes of the Pharisees, when they saw that he was eating with sinners, we're talking Jesus was eating with sinners and tax collectors, said to his disciples, so these are the Pharisees speaking to the disciples of Jesus, they say, why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners? And Jesus heard it, and he said to them, those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick, I came not to call the righteous, but sinners, right? So the reason why God uses people like Abraham, the reason why Jesus came and ate with tax collectors and sinners, and I'm going to mention a lot of other people that God uses, is because that's one of his characteristics and attributes. That's one of the things that actually makes him worship worthy, is the fact that he is able to use broken vessels to accomplish his task. And I'll explain a little bit more why he does this, right? So God does not use perfect people to accomplish his task, because if he did, who would receive the glory? I want you to think about that for a second, right? If Abraham was a completely perfect, sinless person, and he does perfect and sinless things, who's going to receive the glory? Well, it's going to be Abraham, more likely, right? It's going to point to Abraham being the person who is capable of doing this. But when you take a broken person and they do amazing and wonderful things, what that does is that points us to ask the question, right? How did they do this? And then that way God will receive the glory, right? So God uses deeply flawed and broken people to accomplish his tasks, his goals, because when the job is finished, who gets the glory, right? It is God. So let's take a look and see what other major characters of the Bible, and these are major characters. A lot of the minor characters of the Bible also have pretty major flaws, and God uses them anyway. And I want you to think about what that means for you and for me. What message is God trying to send the world? Is he trying to say you have to be perfect in order for me to use you and save you and all these things? Well, the answer is no. So what we know about Moses, for instance, is that Moses actually had a speech impediment. He had a stutter. We also learn in the Bible that Moses murdered someone, or at least accidentally murdered someone, and that Moses was not well respected. He was not respected by the Egyptians, and he was not well respected even by his own people. They actually came against him and tried to reject him in multiple times, and yet we all, Muslims, Jewish people, and Christians, we all think Moses is one of the great major prophets. What about some other characters of the Bible? This guy's a little bit more minor. So one of the 12 sons of Israel, one of the 12 sons of Jacob, Judah, he was used very strongly by God, and but we know that Judah was a liar. So if we read about his story, um, lying to the woman he had eventually married, he was a betrayer. He betrayed Joseph, and Judah was a fornicator. But he was used very powerfully by God to bring about his purposes. King David, again, one of the most major figures of world history, but especially in Jewish history, that really the major founder of the Jewish nation, where he united all of the tribes of Israel. There's a story in the Bible about him committing adultery and then conspiring to murder the husband of the woman whom he had committed adultery with. God still used David to accomplish his task. His son Solomon, a lot of issues with Solomon, but he was considered to be one of the wisest men who ever lived, but he practiced excessive polygamy, and he even practiced idolatry. Samson, another major figure in the Bible, he was disobedient to pretty much everyone, including God. He was known to visit prostitutes, and he was very, very arrogant as a person. And yet, God still used him because God is a redeemer. We obviously know about Joseph, who's one of the most flawless characters in the Bible, but he was arrogant. And we all know about Jonah, swallowed by the whale, who was trying to run away from God, was disobedient to God, was spiteful towards God, that he would even deliver a message to Nineveh that could potentially rescue them from God's coming judgment, which he did do. So he was even used by God. So when we read about these people, when we read about these prophets, many of us struggle with the same sin problem that they have. And what we can gain from that is we know that God's love and mercy and grace for us is greater than our ability to sin and be perfect. So part of the thing that we're talking about, the criteria of embarrassment and the reliability of the text, is the fact that it does include these embarrassing facts about these biblical heroes, right? When we read their stories, we realize that we too, if they can commit adultery and they can sin and they can be disobedient from God and they can murder people, conspire to murder if they're born with certain speech impediments or things of that nature, God can still use them, and God can still use us to do wonderful and amazing things. That is what the gospel is. It is the good news. It is the hope, right? So Paul writes in 2 Corinthians 12, verse 9, he says, "But he said to me," right? So Paul was wrestling with a devil or a demon who put a thorn in his side, and he prayed to God 3 times, "Please remove this from me." And God refused to remove it from him. And all God said to him was, "My grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in weakness." We talked about this earlier, guys. The broken and weak vessels that we are as human beings, God uses those broken people to do amazing things so that he may receive the glory and not us. And Paul says this himself: "Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly of my weakness, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me." And this power, I want everyone to understand this. This power is available to you and to me right now if we humble ourselves and fall down at the cross before Christ Jesus. So when Deedat is trying to point out that the Bible is embarrassing, okay, great, Deedat. Yes, you're absolutely correct. There's a lot of embarrassing facts about people. But earlier in your previous message, you were telling all of us how we can rely on the Bible, and how your Quran actually says in multiple places that we can rely on the Bible for its truthfulness and honesty. And yet here you are disobeying textual critics and historians, and also you're disobeying your God himself to try to say that our Bible is somehow corrupt. What other weird things are in the Bible that Deedat likes to point out? Well, he's continuing to kind of pick on Abraham, who's the founder of his faith according to their religion as well. And so he married Hagar. He married the maid servants of Sarah. Okay, so this is where it says in Genesis 6, chapter 16, verses 1 through 3. Now Sarah, Abraham's wife, had borne him no children. She had a female Egyptian servant whose name was Hagar. And Sarah said to Abraham, Behold, now the Lord Yahweh has prevented me from bearing children, even though God told Abraham he and Sarah would have a child. So they're being disobedient here, by the way. So Sarah tells Abraham, Go into my servant, who's Hagar. It may be that I shall obtain children by her. And Abraham listened to the voice of Sarah. Now you'll mention him listening to the voice of Sarah, just how Adam listened to the voice of Eve. So after Abraham lived 10 years in the land of Canaan, Sarah, Abraham's wife, took Hagar the Egyptian, her servant, and gave her to Abraham as her husband, or to Abraham, her husband, as a wife. Okay, so this is completely pointless nonsense. This is absolute nonsense, guys. I don't really know why he's pointing this out, except for maybe to try to provide proof or some sort of evidence that because Hagar was a wife of the founder of our faith, any offspring that come from Hagar can be viewed as Abraham's offspring, which include Ishmael, which was the one that Abraham bore, and Ishmael is the father of the 12 princes, which kind of reside in the northern Arabian area. So I think he's trying to draw a link between Abraham marrying Hagar and Hagar's offspring being that of the promise, the offspring of the promise, which in the Bible they clearly are not. He is blessed, Ishmael is blessed, but the promise goes through Isaac, right, which becomes the Jewish people, and Ishmael becomes the Arabian people. Okay, he's again attacking the founder and father of his faith. He's again going against textual critics and historians, and again going against what his Quran says about the perfect preservation of the Torah and the gospel. So he's saying that Abraham that the Bible records Abraham did not fulfill the promise that God gave to him. So in Genesis 13, verse 15, it says, And the Lord Yahweh said to Abraham, after Lot had separated from him, Lift up your eyes and look from the place where you are, northward and southward and eastward and westward. For all the land that you see, I will give to you and to your offspring forever. I will make your offspring as the dust of the earth, so that if one can count the dust of the earth, your offspring can be counted. Arise, walk through the length and breadth of the land, for I will give it to you. So Abraham moved his tent and came and settled by the oaks of Mamre, which are at Hebron, and there he built an altar to Yahweh. So Deedat is trying to say that Abraham did not receive the land. He received the land exactly then. We actually read it in the verse, right? So this is what it says in the verse that proves that Deedat is wrong, even in the cherry pick context that he chose to use. Arise, says Yahweh, walk through the length and breadth of the land, for I will give it to you. So Abraham moved his tent and came and settled by the oaks of Mamre. What is he doing if not settling in the land that God said, this is your land? That was his land. He set his tent there, which was at Hebron, and there he built an altar to Yahweh. So pretty sure Deedat, he inherited that land and he lived in that land in that very same passage that you cited. Even Stephen talks about Abraham in his account, right? So he's trying to say that there's some sort of contextual issue here, that Stephen says not so much of a foot of land did Abraham receive, right? So let's take all of this into context. So this is what it says. It's a pretty long passage here, guys. So Acts chapter 7, verses 2 to 8. The God of glory appeared to our father Abraham when he was in Mesopotamia. Therefore he lived in Haran, and said to him, Go out from your land and from your kindred, and go into the land that I will show you. Then he went out from the land of the Chaldeans and lived in Haran. And after his father died, God removed him from there and into the land which you are living now. Okay, so we're going to pause here for a little bit, right? So we're talking about the land of Ur, the land of the Chaldeans. We're talking about, I can't remember if it's Iraq or Iran, that area over there. So we're talking about the Fertile Crescent. So he goes from the eastern part of the Fertile Crescent up around north around Turkey. And in that Turkey region, he settles in the land of Haran, right? Then after his father dies in Haran, he then travels south through the Fertile Crescent to present-day Israel, Palestine, right? So, and then Stephen says to the crowd in Jerusalem, right? Stephen is in Jerusalem delivering this message to the descendants of Abraham, the Jewish people, the Israelites, right? The tribes of Judah and all of the 12 tribes. He's delivering this message to them who are actually living in the land as physical proof that they received the land, and the promise of God resides and continues, like he said, forever, right? And this is what Stephen goes on to say, and yet he gave him no inheritance in it, not even a foot's length, but promised to give it to him as a possession and to his offspring and after, right? But we remember that he put his tent there. So we're going through a timeline here with Stephen. Though he had no children, and God spoke to this effect that his offspring would be sojourners in the land belonging to others, which is true, who would enslave them and afflict them for 400 years, which happened when they went to Egypt. But I will judge the nation they serve, which happened to Egypt, which is Moses who brings them out in the Exodus. And said God, and after that they shall come out and worship me in this place, the land of Hebron, the land of Israel, Palestine. And he gave them this covenant of circumcision. And so Abraham became the father of Isaac and circumcised him on the 8th day. And Isaac became the father of Jacob, right? And Jacob is renamed Israel, and Jacob of the 12 patriarchs, or the 12 tribes of Israel. Okay, so back into this, we talked about it through the passage, but we're going to focus a little bit more on it, some things we want to consider. So here's the quote here. Yet he gave him no inheritance in it, not even a foot's length, but promised to give him a possession and to his offspring after him. So at the very time that he's mentioning that, right? I said this is time. He's going through a timeline. At the time that he was going to Israel, Palestine, he did not, or the land of Canaan, right? He did not yet receive the inheritance, but Genesis clearly shows in the passage that we mentioned that he set up his tent and he resided and received that land. And we know that that land was set up there. It's still there, by the way. Miraculously, a nation was born in one day. And that is that. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Hopefully this helps you out. Next time we're going to go into some more absurdities that Deedat thinks, and I want us to keep in mind how hilarious it is that he goes against his own Quran, he goes against textual critics and historians, and makes these stupid claims while he also relies on the Bible to be a prophecy about the Arabians somehow carrying responsibility and the message of God forward to all of mankind, which it doesn't, which we talked about in the very first video. So thank you guys again. I appreciate you so much. Hope you have a fantastic day, and remember that Jesus loves you.